So good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are, or evening if you're watching this somewhere else in the world. Jim Gerson here, Vice President of Sales and Marketing for CareStack. And in conjunction with ClearGauge, we're really excited to host today's webinar on trends and best practices to increase your patient collections. So a couple of quick housekeeping items, and then we'll get started with the presentation. We're scheduled to run today for a full hour. The presentation will probably be about 45 or 50 minutes, and we'll leave some time at the end of the webinar to address questions. As you enter today's webinar, you are automatically put into mute. If you do have any questions for our panelists, we encourage you to use the Q&A feature within Zoom, which is on the bottom of your toolbar. And I will go through the questions. If it makes most sense, we will address them as we go through the presentation today, through the program. If it's more applicable to come to it at the end when we have the time allocated, we'll do that. So please make use of the Q&A. And also feel free to use the Q&A feature for any issues that you might be having with the audio or visual aspects of today's presentation. So those are the main housekeeping items. Really, the intent of doing this program is to deliver several pearls or actionable items that you can take back to your dental practice and implement tomorrow. You know, whether you're on the office team, on the clinical team, or somewhere in management, and that's what we want to bring you today. But first, we're going to take a quick moment just to kind of provide a little bit of context on the two organizations that are hosting today's call. So I know this will be brief. It's a little shameless plug for both CareStack and ClearGauge, and then we'll get right into the content. So Priscilla, thanks for forwarding the slide. Right now, you're looking at CareStack in the bottom left-hand corner. I'm in the corporate office here in Celebration, Florida. That's where we are headquartered in the US. There's about 35 of my teammates based out of this office. And you see some important statistics about our company. But real briefly, CareStack is a 100% cloud-based system for the management of the single or multiple location dental practice. And we typically work with two types of clients. The first is the practice that's growing and having success and want to continue to add new offices or grow their operatory foot count and see technology as reducing some of the inefficiency, just don't know how to get there. The second type of client, they're also visionaries and ambitious, but they've grown frustrated and aggravated by managing many different subscriptions from disparate providers to run their dental practice. And as you can see from the top line here, this is everything that CareStack provides in one all-inclusive cloud-based solution. And so that's kind of the quick 30-second commercial on CareStack. And now I'd like to turn it over to Priscilla Pennington and Julie Jenkins, who are experts on this topic and represent the ClearGauge organization. So ladies, why don't you take it away and give a quick introduction on behalf of ClearGauge.
We appreciate it. And thanks again, Jim. I'm Priscilla Pennington, and I have with me today Julie Jenkins. We really appreciate your time. For those of you not familiar with ClearGauge, we were founded in 2009 with the mission of helping patients to receive and pay for their healthcare services using our patient payment tools and financing platform. We have over 3,000 clients that are using ClearGauge today. Over 500,000 patients have been managed through our platform. We've processed over $1 billion in patient payments, really focusing on helping you to collect more revenue with less staff time in your office. So we really look forward today to sharing some of the best trends and best practices that we're really seeing out there from our best practice. And as Jim mentioned, hopefully have a few nuggets that you can take back and use.
Thank you again. Let me add to the word of welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast and good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. We are looking forward to working with you on this. So things have started to change recently for dental providers in the overall healthcare landscape, with more patients covered by high deductible insurance plans. While dental insurances may not have adopted these high deductible plans to the degree in which medical has, there is a trickle-down effect in play that impacts the dental world. Patients have more of a drain on their finances due to the increased medical deductibles, and as a result, have less time to spend or less money to spend on dental needs. Dental care may be taking second place as patients make decisions about which bill to pay. Most dentists that we speak with are repeatedly sending paper bills to patients to collect on those outstanding balances. Patients often don't pay after the first reminder. And with them knowing it'll be another 3 to 6 months before they see you again, their urgency is simply not there. I read a statistic recently where a group of people were asked to rank the order in which they would pay their bills if finances were tight. Out of 10 options, dental care was number 8, and it was behind cigarettes. So we know that this is definitely, isn't that crazy? I know, we know that this is the choices people make, but it's impacting each of you out there and how to run your practice and taking care of your revenue. So running those 30, 60, 90-day reports, printing and mailing the statements, it's administrative work that can be both costly and inefficient by draining your staff time and creating lags in cash flow. Overall, it's putting a burden on the industry and financial health of dental offices nationwide. A Bankers Health Group survey found that the #1 concern for most dentists, 88%, is the patient's ability to pay for treatment, for the procedures that they need for their best health. Now, dentists are concerned about their patients. They have a genuine care and concern for their well-being. So that makes sense, right? The second biggest concern, and this also makes perfect sense, you're going to see it, was practice revenue by 86% of the respondents. You all went into the healthcare field because you care about people. First concern is worrying about the patients, their well-being, needing them to pay for wanting them to pay, be able to pay for procedures that they need. But at the same time, you have to worry about your business and your family and your team. So dental practices are constantly in a state of balancing patient care with practice care. And keeping that balance in mind of caring for those who can't afford it and protecting your practice revenue, we want to take the time to walk through trends and best practices to drive your patient collections. Think of your patients as consumers. Patients are not only getting smart about shopping for where they want to get their products and services, but they're getting smarter about the quality and experience as well. In a report about the state of consumerism in healthcare, as they talked to healthcare organizations across the country, they found that 90% of respondents believed that improving elements of their consumer experience was a high priority for their organization. But then only 8% of those groups have implemented a successful consumer-based strategy. Similarly, 58% of groups cited identifying digital tools to enable consumer engagement as a priority. But then only 14% of those groups have actually implemented anything new. I can't speak specifically as to why those practices have such a low implementation rate. Maybe it's a lack of belief in their statement. Maybe they just consider it a lower priority. But I suspect there might also be a little bit of thinking of patients as consumers that might feel impersonal. Maybe they feel like it's money driven. I struggle with that. But like the desire maybe to truly help someone who's not there. The reality is, when it comes to the mechanics of payments, patients do need to be thought of as consumers. The cycle of patient care is a dual approach. The treatment aspect is personal, but the mechanics of payment is all business and it's consumer based. I think everyone in healthcare realizes things need to change, but now it's a matter of finding innovation and tools that fit with the philosophy of your practice.
And so as you start to think about our daily lives, we're completely consumed with technology. It's literally in everything that we do. I forgot my phone at the home the other day when I went to the gym, and I honestly thought I was gonna die. What if someone needs me? And that's sad, but you have to think about it from the consumer aspect. We're all super busy, so are our patients. They're completely used to scheduling their appointments, paying all their bills online, and they really do expect that same experience from their healthcare experience. And I had one practice administrator in an office that put in a way that I really liked, and they were talking about it in terms of shifting how they think about their patients. And when you're interacting with your dentist, they think of that as, this is our patient, we're talking about your care. But then in every other action within the practice, they're actually a consumer. And I think when you start to shift your mindset that way, it's really important to think about the journey so you can actually break it down even further. Because when you start to think about, all right, how are we describing that patient journey? We want them to feel like they can trust their providers and their care teams, that it's well coordinated in terms of their care plan and their visit and their options. And then that their care team has compassion for what they're experiencing and not only listening to their needs, but also responsive and respectful. Whereas consumers, it's a little bit more about that convenience of the experience. Do they feel like it's personalized for them? Are you providing them with on-demand tools to interact with your team? And is it really a hassle-free experience? And of course, technology-friendly, like everything else in their lives.
Right. So as we discuss these trends and best practices for patient collections, we want to keep all of that in mind. And there are some core foundations on which to build. We're going to look at keys to creating a successful financial program and aspects to consider when developing guidelines and options with that plan. With documented guidelines, everyone meeting with patients should understand the office expectations and the versatility available for helping those patients. Educating your team on how to talk to patients about finances with confidence and in an approachable manner is vital so that patients are open to discussing their financial needs. It's such an uncomfortable conversation for many. Patients shouldn't ever be surprised by the financial expectations or fees within an office. So we'll touch on various ways to ensure that your patients are well informed instead of surprised. It should be your goal when that balance is due for your patients to say, okay, that's about what I was thinking, as opposed to having sticker shock and being upset with the visit.
Hey, Julie, before we move on, we do have a question. Can you go back a slide from the audience?
Sure.
And again, I want to encourage people, this is coming from a participant, about educating your team. When you say in an approachable manner, one of our participants was asking about if you could give an example of what that looks and sounds like or feels like.
Sure, and so we are going to go into that just a little bit more further down. But you always want to be in a room that's private, a private conversation. Don't ever approach a patient about a past due balance at the open window where others in the lobby can hear. It just makes them shrink inside. So you always want to make sure that you have a private room available or a private area to discuss that. Of course, just the basics of putting yourself in their position, be compassionate with it. And again, we are going to delve a little more into it, but that just to touch on it a little so that they don't have to wait till that portion of the discussion.
Sure, no problem. Thank you.
Absolutely, not a problem. When it comes to setting up the programs, though, when you're getting ready to create that financial plan, you want to make sure that you know your costs. So my husband and I watched this show on CNBC called The Profit with Marcus Lemonis. And he's an investor who buys into struggling small businesses and helps turn them into great successes. In the show, as he's evaluating the company and learning about their processes and financials, he always asks the responsible party, what does it cost you to make this? It's amazing how many people do not truly know what it costs them to make their product. So for example, last week, the one that we were watching, it was on DVR, but the one we were watching last week, the product, the man said with, just absolute confidence, it cost us $1.43 and we sell it for X amount. So throughout the show, as they go to visit the manufacturer and they start piecing together the expenses, they learn that the true cost is actually 40 cents more to make than they were selling it for.
Wow.
So they were losing money.
Wow.
So they all, I know it was a big deal. He was so confident. They all think they have an idea. They think they know, or they have a rough idea of what it costs. But when they get into that deep dive of the financials, they learn that it's not what they thought. Now, fun show. We love to watch it. We learn from it. But I mention it because there's a commonality among these failing businesses, and that's that they don't truly understand their costs. You're in the business of helping people. You're going to feel compelled to bend and compromise in the best interest of your patients. You have a relationship with them. You like them. Sometimes you just love them as a friend and you care about making sure they get the best. So you're going to feel that compassion and that compelling need to help them. But understanding your cost is vital in determining how much flexibility you have when it comes to offering financial options to your patients so that you can maintain that balance of practice and patient care. You're going to want to know, what are your fixed operating expenses? What are the variable costs of each treatment? And it can be, it can be a little time consuming to stop and figure that out, but you do need to take a moment and figure that information out. All of that's going to help you understand how selective can you be with your appointments. If you have a lot of open appointments, well, maybe you don't need to be extremely selective. But if you do, then you want to start being selective in deciding, is it going to be better for you to fill that seat with a cash up front, multi-service cavity, or is it better to take an appointment that's a crown, but they're going to end up paying it out over time. So make sure that you know your costs to start off with so that you can set up your financial plans. The next thing that you need to take into consideration is the patient's financial position. You can't judge a book by its cover. I mean, we always hear that. You can't judge a patient by the car they drive. Multimillionaires often drive old pickup trucks, especially if you live in Texas. But an address that indicates an apartment might be an expensive waterfront condo. I've even heard, this was actually in Atlanta, but I've even heard of people driving the nicest of cars, just high-end Lexus, nicest of cars, but they live in a shack. And their thought is, everybody sees their car, very few people see their home. And so they want to maintain that image. So how can you really know where your patients are financially? Obviously, you don't want to run a hard credit check on every patient that you want to provide some flexibility to. And certainly patients are going to be hesitant to let you do that. They're not going to want their teams, right? And then there's financing options out there that will simply tell you yes or no. They qualify or they don't qualify, but they still don't provide an understanding that's going to give you allow you to make an informed decision, to give you enough information to do that as to what options you should give the patient. You can do, and what our clients have found to be successful, is a soft credit check. And this will provide a risk score without pinging the patient's credit. So it is something our clients have found to be successful. It gives them a simple A through F rating. They have, an algorithm that runs in the background, and it's based on things like assets, liens, job tenure, time at residence, payment history, etc. But this can help you, something like this can help you achieve that goal. It's kind of that soft medium where you're not pinging the patient's credit, you're not having to delve into things, but you're not putting yourself at so much risk either.
And I think that's really important when you start to think about, one, do you want to provide in-house payment plans? Do you want to offer financing options? It's really helpful to start thinking about it and understanding the likelihood of default, just so that way you can determine, do I need to take a down payment? How much? What types of options do I need to offer? And so you can see here from these two graphs, on the left is your percentage mix of where patients fall in that credit spectrum. And you can see it's really a bell curve here. The bottom half of those C's all the way down to your F patients, those are going to be the ones that are in that subprime credit, and they're most likely not going to be approved by a traditional third-party financing solution, since you can see on the right, their risk of default is just so much higher, which really means you're either going to need a financing partner like ClearGauge, or you're going to need to offer in-house plans for those patients, because unfortunately, they're probably just not going to be approved by traditional third financing. So these patients, they typically have a higher risk, which is really why those financing options aren't available to them. But it's usually the ones that they really need some sort of financing option the most, because they don't have that money to pay for it up front. And so we completely understand the reason you went into the business to begin with is you really want to help and serve every patient, even those D through F patients that have poor credit history. You still want to find ways to work with them, and you don't want to completely turn them down, but at the same time, really just need to think about it strategically, so that way you can make a really informed decision about that associated risk.
Hey, Priscilla, we do have a question. I'm sorry to interrupt here, from the audience. Going back to the soft credit check, and maybe this is appropriate later on, but I'm sorry it came up, but I think it could be fitting now. Is there a specific company that you recommend for a soft credit check? How does that work? What does that look like?
Well, that's something that we provide within our software as well. It's something that is part of our services that we utilize.
Okay.
It's built into our platform. So I don't know if there's other companies out there that run it separately, but we have it built into ClearGauge. So that way you have a really clear understanding of kind of where that patient falls. And then you can really start to give different guidelines and outlines of what you might be willing to offer them.
And why don't we come back to that? Maybe we don't want this to be a shill for our company solutions. We want to really give everyone kind of pearls.
Definitely.
But Demetra, go back that slide for a moment, because I do have another question that I want to pose to you. Again, from the audience, in your experience, what is the average amount that you've seen patients can afford for their monthly payments?
Sure. So typically we're seeing that the patients with the D through the F, they can typically afford between $125 to $150 a month without having to default on a car payment or go without groceries for their family. So that's really the sweet spot. I think the exact number that's come from our studies is 145, but generally that 125 to 150 is manageable.
And then another question that's really helpful. So someone's asking about, like, using C as an example. Can you, in broad terms, how do you define, like, what are some example criteria that you would use to put someone in a bucket that's C as an example?
So that's, if I'm understanding what they're looking for in that, it's really based on that algorithm, and it's not something I could really expand on other than it's really looking at a full picture as opposed to just a number. It's looking at a full picture of those different types of things, their assets, their employment history.
Got it.
That sort of thing.
Thank you. Sorry, please go ahead. I just want to make sure we tackle this when they're appropriate.
That's why we're here. I wish it were an algorithm I could just put out there for you, but unfortunately that's So let's talk about those options that are often successful and will help with your collections, and in which you would also use the risk score. So one of the things that you can do is, without the risk score, but is to have a credit card on file. You can make this mandatory or just highly encourage it, but with a credit card stored securely on file in a PCI compliant system, once the insurance company, if you file with insurance, once insurance has paid and the true balance is known, that card can be run for the precise amount that's due. So there's no effort on the patient side. And with an automated service, it's no effort on your side beyond the point of collecting the card on file at the patient visit. So it's a convenient method for both the office and the patient. You don't have to spend time collecting and then maybe issuing a refund, or then having to go back and collect more because the estimate wasn't exact and you need more money from the actual patient due. So it's a really great way to do this. And the convenience that it saves in the office, the efficiency it provides is just tremendous. So I used to work for an orthodontist office for many years. And as you know, that's a large sum, a large expense, and it's typically broken up into monthly payments. But with orthodontia, at least in our particular office, they weren't always in the office every single month. And so there were parents who were conscientious about their bill. They didn't want to wait 6 weeks to make a payment and be late, but they didn't want to have to deal with remembering to write the check. Did I write it last time I was in? How many weeks has it been? And so what we did, and I'm really kind of embarrassed that we did this at this point, we had this little half sheet of paper, and those moms would come in and they would fill out this little form with all of their credit card information and their expiration date and everything that we needed about their credit card. And that paper would be stored in a filing cabinet. And at the start of the month, our office manager, Carol, would pull those out, pull out those sheets of paper, and she would hand key every payment for each of those patients, enter it into the practice management software, write the receipts, send them out. And it was such a manual process. I think about how wonderful it would have been and how it would have saved her a full day's of work just on that portion alone. And so having a credit card on file, especially if it can be automated, is just a tremendous time saver. It's going to give you not only convenience, but consistency in the payment, and it's going to help you get paid faster. It's going to reduce your collection efforts because it's already paid. You don't have to collect. Now, with that, I will say, A lot of times when we bring this up, we'll get an objection. I don't think our patients are ever going to do that. They're never going to give us their credit card to store on file. The reality is they are probably doing that today with Amazon and Netflix. They probably do it when they rent a car, right? You put your credit card on file with the rental car agency, and once you've returned your rental car and they know exactly what the cost is, then they process that bill, right? It's the same exact thing. And I know it's a little unusual sometimes to start a new conversation that you're not used to, but just think about the many places where we have our credit cards stored. Concerns about identity theft and credit card fraud aren't stopping most people from storing their credit card information online. 2 out of 3 online shoppers have their cards stored for future purchases. And I can't think of a single patient that we had come through our office that considered it odd or security risk, it still makes me laugh, to put all of their information on a half sheet of paper. But the difference is we were their caregivers. We had a relationship with them. There was a trust, right? And the same is true for all of you. I mean, if we're all willing to store our card with random stores or online sites, how much more willing should we be to store it with somebody that's responsible for our health and with whom we have an ongoing relationship? So really the best thing would be to make this mandatory, at least for the average amount of care that you have in your office, or the standard cleaning cost, if nothing else. But again, not everybody wants to make it mandatory, and if not, maybe just highly encourage it with your patients. And recently, I was reviewing one of our client accounts that uses, they store credit cards on file. It's a feature that we have. But the first month they started using this functionality, they collected 54% of patient responsibility, which I thought was pretty impressive for the first month. They are committed, they had a plan in place, and they were ready to go. That was a really good adoption rate. The next month, as they began getting used to asking patients for that information and they started fine-tuning their messaging, that number jumped to 87%. So I think that's huge. Think of the impact that change can make in your practice, just from one workflow change. It'll save you a tremendous amount of time and improve your AR. Now, also,
hey Julie, I just want to do a quick time check with you guys. I know we're about half an hour. We've got about probably 17 or 18 minutes left. I just want to make sure we're tracking okay with your presentation.
Perfect.
Yeah, we're good. Thank
Great.
you.
Okay.
So you can give patients a sense of control also. That'll put their mind at ease. So if they're a little hesitant, you can certainly say, look, we're going to give a cap to this amount. We're going to put your card on file, but there will be a cap on it. We won't charge more than X amount. You can put a limit on how many times you might use that card. So give them some control over it as well, and that would be helpful in easing their mind. Practices have a 70% chance of receiving payment at the time of service, compared with a 30% chance of successfully collecting it after a patient leaves the practice. So you can decrease the risk of defaulting by offering small discounts for payment in full if you're not doing the credit card on file. Obviously, payment in full is better. So that's a good idea as well. I had an appointment last week where if they had offered me a discount, I would have definitely paid in full. That would have incentivized me. Instead, they allowed me to pay in 2 months, and I want to hold on to my money. So I took the 2 months. I think most offices these days, maybe on a small scale, maybe on a large scale, will offer some payment plans. So I do want us to spend some time here about payment plans. If we don't set it up properly, if you don't manage the way that that's done, patients are going to set up their own payment plan. They're simply going to send you a check for whatever they can afford when they can afford it. And again, we know that they'll sometimes put you behind cigarettes. So you want to go about this purposefully, right?
Right.
Go about it purposefully, and let's find a good way, work with them at the onset of treatment to discover a plan that's going to give them consistency. That'll also help you in forecasting your monthly income moving forward.
Definitely. And I think as you're setting up those financial policies, it's really just important to start thinking first what type of down payment you're going to require. we've done some analysis looking at what is the patient's risk of defaulting, and it drops significantly based on the amount of down payment you take. If you take 0 versus 15, you can see that in some instances it almost drops by half the amount. And it also changes a little bit as well in terms of the term. That plays a really big role in the default rate, just because the longer the term, the higher the likelihood that a patient might default. What we don't really show here, and kind of what Julie was talking about earlier from that question, was you don't really see that payment amount. And so a lot of clients sometimes make the mistake where they really want to put a patient on a shorter plan because they want to get paid quicker. But in reality, that might be outside of what your patient can afford, and they're probably just going to end up not paying it anyways. So especially if you have a patient, maybe they are a patient that's an F patient, they have a $2,000 balance. If you try to put them on a 6-month plan, it's just not going to be a really realistic option, and you're not setting yourself or your patient up for success. So just look at, how can you raise and lower that down payment to make it fit both your policy and the patient needs. And at the end of the day, what you really want to think about is, can that amount at least cover some or maybe potentially even all of your upfront cost?
So can you take a moment here, just to kind of explain this graph, just to walk through what people are looking at. There's a quick question on that.
Yeah, so when we're looking at the length of the term, and you can see here if it was a 6-month all the way up to a 24-month plan, the bar in blue is showing the default rate. So what is your risk that that patient might stop paying if you take no down payment versus even if you just take a 15%. So you can see for that 24-month term, just by, instead of taking no down payment, taking 15%, you dropped it from 20 to 14%. And the reason we found that that's really important is then the patient has a little bit of skin in the game, because then it's not like they're just agreeing to something, they're really buying into that treatment plan as well as buying into making that commitment to pay and continue to pay.
So Priscilla, we have a question here on this front.
Sure.
For practices that are just starting to require a down payment, what do you recommend as kind of the median amounts?
Good question.
Yeah, definitely 10%. I wouldn't go below that. Really, 20 is preferable. I did talk with a practice last week that was taking a leap and went with 40% down payment. They were just trying it out. They actually were having surprisingly good success with that. What they found to be successful about it is those who really, really wanted the treatment and were committed to it and committed to the payment, if they couldn't afford that 40%, they went home and saved for it and came back a month or so later and got the treatment. So it kind of helps self-select out those that might default. That was pretty high, but I would say a minimum of 10, preferably 20. So after you look, no problem. After you look at down payments, another thing that you can do that is really going to help your team in talking with patients about setting up plans is to create guidelines through balance tiers. Determine a range of monetary balance tiers that will allow the team to have some adaptability when working with patients to set up a plan. So your billing manager could probably tell you offhand where those delimiters are in your charges that naturally fall into which procedures they align. Just make sure that that fits in with your cost analysis that you've done. We have up here an example of just a balance range just for conversation's sake. You can see there's a couple of different tiers, and with each tier we've set up a maximum number of months for that payment plan. So just because there's a maximum number of months doesn't mean that your team is going to or has to start off saying, if you fall within here, if you fall within the $1,000 to $1,500 range, why don't you just pay 10 months, right? You always want to start lower, and they can start off with the patients asking, what can you afford or how long can you do this? But it gives them flexibility in talking if they have that guideline. So figure out your length of terms, how long you want to extend for each of the tiers. You can also add interest onto your plans to help recoup some of your charges, some of your administration costs. Doesn't have to be much. I definitely would say that it should be less than a regular credit card. If you're wanting your patients to do this through you and you're wanting to help them financially, if interest is charged, it should be applied consistently across your patient population. But you can change the interest rate based on the term length. So that'll help incentivize patients to pay it off a little bit faster. You charge less interest on a shorter plan.
And so how much interest are practices permitted to or allowed to charge to patients?
So there are state regulations. It is based on your state. So you would need to look that up. It's a simple Google search. You'll get multiple results and they'll all say the same thing. So check with your state to figure out your allowance there so that you don't go over. And then we've talked a little bit about pay in full. I went ahead and put it on this screen just so that it's there and easy to see. If you wanted to print something out, create something like this for your team, then that can be helpful. And then just be open. If you wanted to be really savvy, you could create it by balance tiers, create a separate plan by different balance tiers. That's trickier, as we talked about, with the fact that the longer the patients can default if you make it too short and too high for them. Could also help patients self-select out if they're not really that committed. So just be really careful with that one. And then you want to be open to patient proposals. You have these guidelines in place, but you know your patients and what they can do. If they ask for something that's just a little bit off of this, at least take it in consideration. Consider the ramifications of being flexible versus procedure abandonment. There's so much flexibility that can be achieved by creating guidelines based on your cost analysis, but to optimize the implementation, the first thing you need to do, though, is educate your team. And we've mentioned this earlier, somebody brought it up. Having an uncomfortable conversation is easier when you feel well prepared and equipped and confident. The more comfortable your team is, the easier it will be to make the patients accepting of monetary conversations. So a clear understanding of those payment options and those guidelines and how they impact the finances of practice will be a major step in obtaining that confidence needed to speak effectively. Of course, you want to do that in a private room. You want to have those conversations privately, but you want to make sure that your team is empowered to have those conversations and that they have some flexibility with the patients and those plans. They should, like we mentioned, always start by asking patients what they can do and how much they can pay, and go from there. Let the patients kind of lead it a little bit from that direction. But taking the time to teach them how to best handle tough situations and approach the hard conversations in a way that's empathetic and transparent is the way to go. All the right words can be said, but if they're not comfortable saying them, the voice quality and body language will say, I don't feel comfortable doing this, or it might even say, I don't think you should spend this much money on dentistry. And that's not the message you're wanting to send.
Well put.
Yes, thank you. So engage patients early as well in these discussions. Make sure that your financial expectations are given to the patient early. So I personally need to know when I go to an appointment, can my FSA cover this? Can my flexible spending account cover this? Do I need to use my checking account? Am I going to need to transfer money out of savings? Am I going to need a loan? So they need a ballpark. They need some sort of idea, and they need to know what's expected of them to begin with. I went to a surgeon, and of course, when the surgeon was referred to me, I went to the website. I saw the expectations clearly there. I got it when I called to make the appointment. Everything they explained to me was right on point. They'd file insurance, but they provided a set amount. And what happened from that is I came to the appointment not only prepared to pay financially, but prepared mentally. So I did not leave that visit emotionally impacted. It wasn't a negative experience for me. Communicating is definitely key. Now, communicating digitally is the preference of most people today. Times have changed. Collecting cell phone numbers and emails, it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but the first thing we can do to start collecting them on each and every payment, each and every patient that walks in the door is going to help. Most retail stores ask for that information just to make a purchase. It cracks me up. I can't pay cash for anything without them asking for my email address. So people are used to this. They may not be used to it in the doctor's office, but again, they're consumers. Retail stores are going to use it for data mining, but you're going to use it for communicating with your patients about your account. Automating those communications is going to eliminate redundant tasks and speed up the revenue cycle. It'll provide consistency. It'll Follow-up will be less likely to slip through the cracks, and it creates an expectation of accountability on the patient's behalf. So it didn't take us long to adjust to the automated appointment reminders, right? Just take it a step further and automate your communications regarding balances. Patients do like to be in control of how they're notified. So you can give them some options like IVR, the automated voice response system, where they can pay at their convenience. They can call in and check on their balance 24/7. Personally, I like to get a text or an email, and if I get it at lunch, that's even better, because then I can go ahead right then and make the payment while I'm not doing anything. Whereas if I get it while I'm at work, now you have to rely on my memory to remember to pay later.
Right, but there's some timing that dental offices can incorporate that right into their workflow.
There is.
Yeah.
I think it's very helpful. But however you use their phone numbers, their emails, however you do, whatever you do, use that information wisely. People are hesitant to give out that information because they're fearful of being inundated by marketing material. I don't want that. Nobody wants that. So be selective in your communications. Don't overuse having their phone number and email address. Let's see. So when you reflect on the patient's financial experience and improving how you collect from your patients, typically increased revenue is the key driver for changing your workflow. And I can assure you, as you start to rethink your financial policies and provide your patients with flexible, manageable payment options, you'll naturally see an increase in payments. It'll also provide you a few other benefits as well, though, like patient satisfaction. There's a positive association between a patient's satisfaction with the care they receive and their provider's ability and willingness to communicate and empathize with them. So having that open dialogue with patients regarding their cost of care and treatment options results in better patient retention and reduction in complaints. You can build those more meaningful relationships with them and grow your office bottom line. Competitiveness in the market is important. The more satisfied your patient, the more motivated they'll be to stay with your practice. And ultimately, when they feel that connection with you, not only will they return for further services, but they'll share referrals as well. Today's patient, like we mentioned, they're consumers. They read reviews, they seek out recommendations when they need care. So focusing on that retention is important as well. And practices that successfully bridge that communication gap regarding patient financial responsibility have an opportunity to build stronger patient bonds and be a resource to help them pay for care and build a stronger business in the future. So that's the review that you want left for you on social media, is your flexibility to work with your patients, your empathy, your willingness to help them, your desire for them to have their best care. When they get all of this as a full package, your need for a collection team is just going to reduce drastically.
Definitely. And for those of you that might be looking to have tools or maybe some new processes to help improve your financial experience, ClearGauge really helps provide dental practices like yours with those patient payment and financing tools. And so as you start to think about how you engage with your patients across the full revenue cycle, ClearGauge has built our platform to provide solutions just to improve how you initiate those conversations, but also help to have that discussion about if they need to have financing to pay for those bills. And in the instance that they're coming in maybe for multiple visits, you might want to use something like our auto pay that you can store it on file. But we also want to allow patients to be able to settle their balances online, even set up a payment plan if needed on their own time, really saving your staff that time and effort. And really what sets us apart here at ClearGauge is just how we're able to provide you with financing where 100% of patients can qualify, regardless of their credit score, and really give you the opportunity to make that informed decision between your group and the patient. So you can decide even if you want to get paid that money up front or collect it over time as the patient pays. ClearGauge's billing and support services can also help free up a lot of staff time by acting as an extension of your practice. So if a patient has their card declined, they need to change a payment method, or even if they want to call in, they got a little bit extra money from their taxes, they want to pay off that balance, really giving you guys the options to be able to do that. So again, Julie and I really appreciate the time you've given us today. Our contact information is here. If you do have any further questions, obviously, please.
We do have 2 questions. Leave that slide up. I think that's good. And I want to mention to everyone, because we have several clients in the audience, they're asking about ClearGauge. ClearGauge is integrated into CareStack. So if you'd like to turn on the functionality of having ClearGauge work in your dental practice, you can reach out to our support team. I don't know if we have I know everyone has my email address because you've been inundated with emails. So just reply back to my email if you want to find more about turning that functionality on within CareStack. So that's an integrated solution within CareStack. However, if you're not a CareStack customer and you want to use ClearGauge outside of our platform, these are the two people that you want to reach out to. But we do have a couple of questions. If you can go back to the slide where we talked about automating payments and balance settlements.
Yes.
There was a question about, is it better for practices to have a standard max amount for the account on file, or should they customize for each patient?
So
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's okay.
I have it, yeah.
Yeah, so when you're doing the automated account on file, should you have a standard amount? I think that it's a good idea to do that. It gives patients some comfort. It gives your team a talking point. You know, hey, we like to have your credit card on file. We like to have a set amount based on X. And usually I would say that should be your average amount of the average cost of a visit within your practice. Obviously, every procedure varies, but this at least gets you a starting point. There should be flexibility in there for customization based on the individual patient. If they're fully open to letting you go, hey, here's what we think your estimate is going to be, then that is the ideal. But aside from that, I would say go with your average cost of treatment.
Very helpful. And then the last question, and then we want to show a couple of slides of some upcoming programs. If you guys can move ahead to that while we're talking about this. A question came in about difference in how patients communicate based on demographics.
Yeah, good question.
Wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, it's funny. We always have that question come up. Oh, I don't know if my older patient's going to use this, or I don't know about that. And it's funny, the other day I saw a stat that was talking about Facebook users, and from 50 to 64-year-olds, 68% of them are on Facebook at least weekly, and 65 and over half are. So I think that you start to look at it from the perspective of, I think that across all demographics, everybody is becoming so much more accustomed to being online. And, you know, we do see sometimes where you still might want to send a paper statement every now and then to certain types of patients that you know they're always going to want it. But overall, we're really seeing that it's being readily adopted, that email, text messaging, everybody really does stay connected on their phones a lot more now. And it really just gives that instantaneous receipt. I don't know about you, I leave my mail stacked and then eventually go through. And most of them, I'm usually seeing the bill that I'm like, I already received that by email and paid that last week. Right. So while I think a lot of folks are still spending a lot of money on that, that's something that you can definitely see some really quick cost savings if you're able to eliminate those costly paper statements.
And I think in addition to that, well, first of all, let me say my in-laws are in their 80s and they are all over Facebook, cell phone, texting, they do it all. Now they might not be the norm, but they're definitely in there. My grandmother's email like crazy. Yeah. Text, not so much some other, but they're definitely in there. But if you just look around in society when you're out to dinner, you're going to see millennials on their cell phone constantly. The Facebook stat is kind of the middle age. They're on emails and cell phones. Mm-hmm. And then even though a lot of the elderly are a little bit tech savvy, you know, they might like that IVR option a little better. At least having that capability is probably a good thing for them.
Yeah, thank you for covering that. Really helpful. And again, the last slide we'll show is your contact information, Priscilla and Julie. Want to thank you again for this really wonderful content. The aim here on these webinars is to deliver meaningful content, not some 45-minute infomercial. So if we fell short of giving you a big pitch for ClearGauge and CareStack, we'll consider that a compliment. But here are some screenshots of upcoming programs. So this is a seminar that we're doing with a really diverse panel. If you're in the Dallas area and are interested in attending, there's information on our LinkedIn handle, so please follow there. And again, it's complimentary in the Dallas area, hosted by Black Ops Management, and includes a really good panel of experts. Do you have traction to grow? The next program we have in a webinar is going to feature one of the co-founders of Tusk, Diwakar Sinha, and the CEO and co-founder of CareStack, Abhi Krishna. And they're going to talk about Scaling Your Dental Practice for Growth. And that's coming up on March 18th. And again, a great place to get all this information from CareStack is by following us on LinkedIn. That's where the most kind of up-to-date and appropriate information is. So on behalf of the ClearGage team, Jim Gerson here from CareStack, I wanted to thank you for your participation. Everyone who's been on this webinar will receive a link to a recording. So if there's a screenshot that you missed or an element of the presentation that you wanted to revisit, you'll get that link from us. And then we'll be posting this to our website in the coming days. So thank you very much for your time. We want to keep you on track and get back to your workday. And thank you, Julie and Priscilla. Appreciate
Thanks again, everybody. We really
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time.
All right, have a good rest of your day. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.